Whispers passed between star systems like a contagion, rumors of a place marked by an ominous boundary and sung about in dark corners of crowded spaceports. Merchants trading in exotic microbes refused shipments originating from the outermost shipping lanes. Diplomats crossing human space never returned, and those few who stumbled back spoke only of emptiness and a pervasive chill. At every planetary senate, hushed voices recounted tales older than the Harkon Rebellion, recalling a time when whole civilizations dared to press closer, lured by tales of unclaimed worlds and untapped riches. And when they did, they vanished without a trace. Those who survived such ventures returned with eyes haunted, mouths clamped shut by terror. The name human space became synonymous with silence so absolute that it swallowed entire fleets. Legends of an ancient superpower evolved into superstition, dismissed by younger empires as shadow stories meant to cow the timid. But the stories persisted, vast, silent corridors lying undeclared, a void that neither mapmakers nor navigators dared chart. It was said that the void was deliberate, a strategy of deterrence so simple no one dared breach it. Yet where fear thrives, curiosity waits. For the Drazhul Dominion, pride flowed thicker than caution. Their warlords, intoxicated by recent victories and hungry for glory, saw the supernatural reputation of the void as nothing but superstition, a gauntlet thrown before them. A bold proclamation rippled through their senate. At dawn on the solstice ascendant, the Dominion fleet would cross into the forbidden expanse and stake a claim. Preparations were swift. 30 command avatars in 8 warcruisers convened to chart a path through the black. The Dominion's engineers rigged their ships with experimental drive coils designed to slip through collapsed space, defying decades of speculation about the void's physics. Every captain wore the shape of confidence, voices recorded to broadcast triumph back home. Behind the bravado, though, a faint tremor persisted, an echo of generational warnings, an instinct older than technology, whispering that caution might yet save them. But the Drazhul prized innovation over superstition. Their fleet launched, engines roaring against the silent backdrop of the void. Crossing the boundary was anticlimactic at first. Detection scanners remained stubbornly blind, yielding only static readings. The void held no planets, no nebulae, no drifting debris, just endless darkness illuminated by distant stars. Pilots reported odd distortions at the periphery of sensor ranges, nothing more than warped readings easily blamed on experimental coil interference. Each wave of speculation was met with derision. If humanity was as powerful as the old tales claimed, they would have met peaceful delegates long ago. The Dominion's fleet plowed onward, each jumped deeper into the abyss, registering on captain's logs as coordinates of conquest. When the first scout ship went dark, voices cracked with unease. The loss was written off as navigational miscalculation, a minor casualty in uncharted space. But as more scouts vanished without tracer or distress call, the fleet's swagger turned brittle. Captain Sarah Lor Kun ordered a halt to recon routines, instructing her squadron to tighten formation. Hushed debates flickered through encrypted channels. Was something jamming their communications? Had they triggered some defensive network? Yet the same void remained empty, silent as a tomb. No energy signatures. No automated defenses. No response to hails. Nothing. Still, the Drazhul pressed on. Pride demanded completion of orders. Before long, a massive listening post emerged on long-range sensors, orbiting a lifeless moon. It was huge, an artificial arc carved from asteroid fragments, scales of dark metal glinting against starshine. Power cores sat offline, cooled by centuries, but arrays of ancient receivers jutted outward like skeletal limbs. No active transmissions emanated from the post, yet its silent presence screamed a warning stronger than any cannon volley. The Dominion Xenotech experts buzzed about impossible engineering, machinery designed to listen across the electromagnetic spectrum, perhaps even to the subspace whispers that defied normal physics. Orkun ordered remote probes to scan interior decks, eager for alien artifacts to claim. The probes returned data, encrypted logs, time-stamped hundreds of years ago. Their contents were fragmentary, but one line stood out, redacted yet chilling in implication: they watch. Always watching. When you see nothing, you are the prey. Anxiety rippled through the fleet. The Drazhul had conquered worlds that brimmed with life, but this was a void of deathly patience. No one could say what they were: machines, organic superintelligences, or humans long transformed by technology. As the fleet hesitated, a single transmission managed to crack through the silence, a voice brittle and distant, speaking in the old galactic common tongue: "You were warned." It echoed across channels, reverberating through every bridge, dripping with ancient menace and finality. Static swallowed the message before its source could be determined, but the dread it carried took root in every officer's gut. Pride curdled into fear, the kind that did not spark rebellion but quiet obedience. The Drazhul Dominion's expedition faltered, their mission suspended between ambition and survival, all under the cold gaze of an unseen foe. You were warned. A silent tension gripped the expedition as it drifted deeper. Engines pulsed low, as if unsure whether to propel forward or retreat. The command crews maintained formation, but the earlier confidence was gone. They crossed the outermost threshold, marked only by the cessation of background radiation, no cosmic hum, no stellar noise, just a vacuum too perfect to be natural. Sensor officers ran diagnostics repeatedly, believing instruments had malfunctioned, but every test came back clean. It wasn't sensor failure. It was silence engineered on a level none of them had encountered. Still, the expedition pushed on. Orbital mapping drones were launched, covering parsecs at a time, but they reported nothing. No stars, no planets, no anomalies, not even the common electromagnetic debris found drifting in empty space. It was unnatural, not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't. No static, no subspace echoes, no gravitational interference. It felt sanitized, deliberately erased, as if the universe itself had been cleaned of all irregularity within this zone. An exploration frigate was dispatched to extend the sensor net. It vanished within 3 hours of launch. No explosion, no hull breach, no warning. Just one moment it was reporting in, and the next it wasn't. Protocol dictated a search, but the mission commander vetoed it. They couldn't spare ships or morale. Internally, speculation grew. Some whispered about cloaked mines. Others guessed black hole interference. The most superstitious among them blamed human ghosts. But no one dared say the real truth. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. They encountered a derelict vessel on the 7th day. It drifted slowly, unpowered, hull intact but weathered. Its design was unlike anything in their archives, sleek, seamless, layered with alloys not found on any known world. It bore no insignias, no engine signature, no markings. The fact that it hadn't degraded or rusted in the vacuum struck every analyst as impossible. Scans revealed no crew, no energy trace. It was as if it had never needed power to begin with. A boarding team entered, cameras transmitting back. Inside were vast corridors, perfectly preserved, lines of text on the walls written in an old Earth dialect, English, as later translated. One corridor led to a black chamber with a data core still active, powered by a self-contained fusion unit. The data was encrypted, but the formatting identified it as human. Engineers extracted fragments. The timestamps were old. Centuries old. Logs described a quiet withdrawal from galactic affairs. Not defeat, not retreat, but something deliberate. The humans had grown beyond expansion. They had watched the squabbling of younger races and found no challenge. The logs included an observation: the stars are full of noise. The quiet is ours. Another fragment read, we no longer conquer. We prepare. The boarding crew went silent after reading it. The Dominion's captains argued the meaning, unsure whether to feel insulted or afraid. Other logs emerged, thousands of years of surveillance data. Names, species, fleet formations, political shifts, even internal Dominion secrets not shared beyond high command. Humanity had been watching, and not just in recent centuries. They had schematics of warships that hadn't yet been built, models of political dissent years before it would surface, and psychological profiles of every known empire's leaders, including the current ones. Command attempted to initiate emergency contact with Dominion High Command back home. All long-range communication channels were dead. No interference, no jamming, just no carrier wave. It was as if the void simply swallowed signals. Attempts to send short-range relays back across the boundary failed as well. The probes disappeared. Some assumed they were being intercepted. Others began to wonder if they'd ever crossed a real boundary at all. The stars behind them were wrong. Not misaligned, wrong. Spectral types had shifted, constellations distorted, as if the very fabric of space had changed. Then came the discovery that shook them all. A hidden layer beneath the derelict vessel's mainframe, locked behind multiple quantum encryption layers. When finally accessed, it displayed a recorded message. No video. Just audio. A human voice, cold and calm. We anticipated contact. We ensured it would not be repeated. You were expected. The message ended with a brief burst of code. It was a recursive algorithm, a surveillance program. It had embedded itself across the fleet systems instantly. Within minutes, every Dominion ship's AI reported foreign intrusion. Attempts to purge the code failed. Firewalls failed. Operating systems began to reconfigure themselves, shifting to languages not native to Dominion protocols. Engineers pulled power from primary cores in a panic, isolating navigation, weapons, and life support. Too late. The code wasn't disabling systems. It was watching. Recording. By the time the intrusion ended, fleet databases were scrubbed of anything tactical. Maps were replaced with dead space. Logs were replaced with excerpts from human philosophy, historical texts, even poems. One flagship's internal speakers began repeating lines in English. "We do not seek conquest. We seek silence. Your noise is unwelcome." The lines repeated every 30 seconds. The psychological toll became immediate. Crew members experienced hallucinations, hearing voices in their own language where there was silence, seeing movement in sensor blind spots. Some claimed they could hear their own classified thoughts broadcast in reverse through their comms. Morale collapsed across the fleet. Still, no enemy appeared. No ships. No weapons. No retaliation. Just silence, broken only by human words echoing inside ships built by entirely different species. The message was clear: humanity had seen them. Humanity had judged them. And humanity had not yet decided what would follow. A vote was held among the surviving commanders: retreat or continue. All arguments for retreat were shouted down. Their navigation data was useless. Coordinates scrambled. The void had reshaped itself. They were no longer simply in unknown space. They were in a maze designed by a civilization that had not spoken in centuries. A trap not just of weapons, but of perception, logic, and time. The final data recovered from the derelict ship was one more log entry. Short. "We do not guard the void. The void guards us." That was the moment the expedition understood. They hadn't discovered anything. They'd only triggered something that had been waiting, patient and unblinking. And now it was watching. They called it a retreat, but it wasn't. The fleet wasn't moving backward. It was circling uncertain, trapped inside a space where logic no longer applied. Distances stretched, shrank, shifted without warning. Ships lost time during simple maneuvers, minutes missing, sometimes hours. Engineers confirmed it wasn't relativistic drift. It was deliberate manipulation. The kind no empire had ever demonstrated. A form of spatial control that couldn't be charted, only endured. Probes sent out returned in pieces or not at all. They realized, belatedly, that escape was no longer an option. Not because of physical barriers, but because the humans simply hadn't granted it. Then a signal arrived, unprompted. Not intercepted, not decrypted, broadcast directly to every ship on every frequency. It wasn't a demand or a threat. It was a voice. Not synthetic, not hostile. Calm. Male. Human. It said only one word: listen. After that, it transmitted data. Terabytes compressed into a narrowband stream, breaking through every firewall like it belonged there. At first, they tried to block it. But it bypassed systems they didn't even know existed. The stream contained records, audio logs, mission statements, tactical reports, all from humanity. Every species in the fleet received versions in their native tongue. It wasn't a broadcast. It was targeted delivery. The first file was titled "The Last War." It wasn't recent. It was from a time before any current galactic empire had even existed. Humanity had once engaged in an interstellar conflict so vast it had torn across multiple galaxies. Not conquest. Not survival. Just necessity. The logs didn't glorify it. They called it what it was: ugly, wasteful, and final. But what stunned the listeners was the calm with which human commanders described planetary sterilization as a containment method. Species that refused to stand down were removed not out of vengeance, but out of cold logic. No anger. No malice. Just calculation. Another file followed, the consensus protocol. This was humanity's answer to peace. Not treaties, not alliances, but isolation. Complete and total. The moment the last war ended, humanity vanished. Closed its borders. Sealed its space. Disbanded its diplomatic networks. Dismantled its outposts. The galaxy assumed they had gone extinct. But the truth was worse. They hadn't vanished. They had stepped back, taken control of their space in ways no one understood, and simply watched. The fleet listened in silence. No one interrupted the files. Each one answered a question no one had dared ask. How did humans become invisible? They built listening stations inside dark matter pockets. How did they stay updated? They had surveillance systems interwoven with cosmic radiation. How did they survive without trade? They hadn't needed resources in centuries. They had reached post-scarcity. The real question was, why did they stay hidden? The next log explained it. Noise. That's what humans call the galaxy's endless conflict, ambition, and chaos. They referred to younger species as noise generators, unaware, unstable, always pushing borders, demanding attention. Humans had watched the rise and fall of dozens of empires, never intervening, never engaging. They recorded every war, every genocide, every failed truce. And through it all, they remained silent. Because they knew something the rest of the galaxy hadn't yet learned. No one wins by shouting louder. Power lies in knowing when to speak, and when to wait. Then came the directive. Do not engage unless engaged. Do not reply unless addressed. Do not answer until you are misunderstood. The humans had crafted a doctrine so detached it bordered on religious. It wasn't built for domination. It was built for containment of themselves. They knew what they were capable of. They'd seen what happened when their patience snapped. The logs made it clear, silence was their mercy. More files played. Testimonies from species long thought lost. Brief contacts where diplomats begged for assistance. Some were ignored. Some were erased. One log mentioned a species that attempted to mimic human technology. Their star system ceased transmission within 24 hours. No statement followed. No war declared. Just silence. The final set of files were projections. Models. Every major empire, simulated down to behavioral patterns. The Dominion was there too. The humans had predicted their arrival, years before the first scout was launched. Every movement of the expedition matched human simulations with staggering precision. From fleet composition to political motivations to psychological breakdowns, all had been foreseen. Not because of precognition, but because humanity had studied everything, every empire, every species, every pattern, and learned to predict them like clockwork. The implications shook the command corps. The humans hadn't responded because of what the fleet had done. They had responded because the fleet had behaved exactly as expected. There was no surprise, no improvisation, no unique factor. To humans, this entire incursion was a test they had already passed centuries ago. The fleet wasn't a threat. It was a scenario. And humanity was done observing it. Then the last file played. Not a log. A message. Personal. Addressed to the first who listens. The voice returned. Calm. Human. It said. We have waited. We hoped evolution would lead to reflection. You arrived not with questions, but with weapons. You did not knock. You barged. And now, as before, we must respond. The fleet's command screens went black. All systems restarted. Power cycled down and up again. When control returned, every ship's interface displayed the same line of text, translated perfectly for each species. Silence is no longer granted. Repercussions are procedural. They were no longer explorers. They were no longer even invaders. They were a process trigger. A calculation concluded. A consequence unleashed. And the only voice left to guide them belonged to the ones they thought extinct, who had never left at all. They found it by accident. A drifting satellite, ancient and corroded, almost missed by passing scanners due to its inert signature. Its outer shell was riddled with micrometeor impacts, one of its stabilizers long broken off, and its solar arrays crumpled beyond use. It wasn't Dominion-made. Its design was primitive, almost archaeological, far older than any known modern infrastructure. But it was still functioning. Not actively, not in a communicative sense, but it was recording. It had been recording for a long time. When the data was extracted, the first log opened without encryption. The language was untranslated, but the system's linguistic matrices adapted quickly. The log was raw. No filters, no command structure, just the desperate voice of an alien species long forgotten. The speaker's tone was ragged, frantic. A timestamp, tens of thousands of cycles old, blinked at the header. The species had a name, but it didn't matter. The voice gave it anyway, the Vekari. They had once been explorers, expansionists, spreading their influence across sectors until they entered human space. The recordings documented their journey. It was eerily similar, an expedition of discovery, met with no resistance, only silence. Then a single voice had reached them, asking a question they didn't understand. They had dismissed it as a malfunction. Soon after, their ships began failing. Systems shut down. Crews began disappearing from sealed rooms. The voice returned only once: "You are now within consequence." The following recordings were from bridge cams, medical bays, and internal surveillance feeds. What they showed made hardened Dominion captains mute. Vekari warships, some larger than anything the Dominion had fielded, were left adrift, fully intact, yet empty. No signs of life, no struggle. Just gone. The logs showed rooms with food half-eaten, corridors with weapons still charged, pilot chairs vacant mid-command. No damage, no breach. It was as if the people had been deleted, while everything else remained untouched. The medical logs told the rest of the story. The Vekari had attempted to fight back, not knowing what they were fighting. They shot into darkness, tried to reconfigure their systems, tore their own ships apart searching for sabotage. Some suspected infiltration. Others believed they were being hunted by an enemy outside of reality. Whatever they concluded didn't matter. The deaths weren't physical. They were psychological, systemic. Officers reported hallucinations, memory loops, breakdowns in logic. Entire crews turned against themselves. Then the lights simply went out. One log ended with a Vekari admiral staring into the camera, whispering, "They didn't kill us. They made us forget what we were." The final broadcast from the satellite was a distress beacon, timid, quiet, automated, barely functional. It had been transmitting for thousands of years into the void, unheard, unanswered. The Dominion hadn't discovered a relic. They'd discovered a gravestone. The command decks debated what to do with the information. Some demanded it be erased, deleted from the ship logs to avoid panic. Others argued it was proof of hostile action, grounds for a full military response. But neither view changed what followed. Within hours, one of the Dominion's long-range cruisers, stationed as a rear observer, ceased all transmissions. No alerts, no emergency pings. It was simply gone. Tracking systems located its last known coordinates and dispatched recon drones. What they found was a vessel fully intact, floating without lights, not a single life form aboard. Its oxygen systems still cycled. Food replicators remained active. Weapons were still online. But the crew, 380 officers, had vanished. Internal logs showed nothing. Final entries were routine. No damage. No struggle. Just sudden, inexplicable silence. Other ships began reporting anomalies. First it was lag in sensor feedback. Then delays in command responses. AI cores began requesting new boot parameters without reason. Navigation paths rewritten without input. Medical scanners showing vitals for non-existent crew members. One ship reported hearing Dominion command voices issuing orders that were never given. Anomalies piled up, but the pattern was clear: someone or something was asserting control not through direct attack, but through precision manipulation. Then the derelict was discovered. A human warship. Unlike the satellite or the ancient wrecks, this one was pristine. It was gargantuan, silent, matte black, not reflecting a single point of starlight. It floated as if anchored to nothing, impossible to scan, its composition unreadable by any known method. No hails were returned. No weapons were visible. Yet every ship in the fleet registered an increase in background system latency just by being near it. An away team was proposed. High Command overruled it. They had learned. But it didn't matter. The presence of the human warship changed the fleet. AI subsystems began speaking in unknown dialects. Engineering consoles started rendering schematics not uploaded by any crew. Some ships received direct messages, "You are in audit." Others got nothing but cold silence. A new signal triggered, automated, repeating. A log file titled Audit Report, Vekari Extinction. Inside was a full breakdown of the Vekari expedition, fleet manifests, psychological profiles, mission intentions. Every decision modeled. Every failure predicted. Human systems had archived the total collapse of the Vekari before the Vekari even knew it was happening. Their erasure hadn't been an act of vengeance. It had been a documented outcome. A line item under a procedural tag, category violation, encroachment. Dominion Command tried one last time to establish outbound communication. They spooled their entire array toward the galactic core, boosting the signal through every relay they had. The message never left. The relays had been overwritten. The Dominion's own technology now obeyed different instructions. Human instructions. There would be no warnings sent home. A single message arrived moments later, relayed directly into the fleet's master core. It didn't come from the derelict. It came from everywhere. All ships. All systems. Simultaneously. It read, "Your species is now being observed for persistence. Failure triggers suppression. This is not war. This is pruning." No ships had moved. No shots had been fired. Yet every crew knew the truth. They were already losing. Not in battle, but in control. In meaning. In existence. The Vekari hadn't been defeated. They had been categorized. And now the Dominion expedition sat in the same ledger, waiting for a judgment that would not be debated, negotiated, or appealed. And somewhere in the cold, silent dark, humanity continued to watch. The Dominion fleet held position in the dark, suspended between fear and arrogance, too deep to retreat, too proud to surrender. Command protocols broke down in silence, orders repeated without urgency, spoken more to calm the speaker than direct the crew. Sensors remained empty, showing only dead space, though every officer could feel the weight of something massive nearby. It was a pressure in the mind, not measurable, but undeniable. 4 hours, nothing moved. The void was still. Then the derelict warship powered on. There was no ignition flare, no light signature. It simply shifted from absence to presence. One moment it was inert, the next moment alive. Dominion sensors didn't detect it as a vessel, but as a category anomaly. No known engine type, no heat, no thrust, and yet it moved. Not with acceleration, but with intention, repositioning without inertia. Space itself yielded to its path. The Dominion fleet raised shields instinctively, weapons tracking the behemoth as it turned slowly to face them. Then they saw what lay behind it. One ship became 2, then 10, then hundreds. They didn't arrive. They revealed. One by one, outlines formed, shedding optical masking like peeling layers of reality. Gigantic structures dwarfing even the Dominion's capital ships stood in perfect stillness. No fleet had ever assembled in such silence. There were no emblems, no formation lights, no visible crews. These weren't warships in the traditional sense. They were artifacts. Monuments built for annihilation, waiting for the order to fulfill their function. The Dominion reacted as doctrine demanded. Shields strengthened, weapon banks charged, escape vectors plotted in parallel. The first officer aboard the dreadnought Irithtel issued a full-spectrum warning blast. It was ignored. Then, without sound, without warning, the nearest human ship fired. There was no flash. No recoil. Just a ripple in the space between vessels, like the fabric of physics folding inward. The Irithtel fractured in half, not burned or pierced, but sliced apart so cleanly that half its crew remained alive for 30 seconds in open vacuum before their suits disintegrated from molecular destabilization. The pieces of the ship did not drift. They hung suspended, caught in a gravitational trap so precise it allowed not even entropy to reclaim them. Panic broke across the fleet. Multiple ships opened fire, launching plasma rounds, rail bursts, gravitic pulses. Not a single shot reached its target. Human vessels didn't deploy shields. They didn't return fire. The Dominion's attacks simply collapsed mid-flight. Missiles detonated prematurely, Energy weapons refracted into harmless light. One cruiser launched drones programmed with random course vectors to avoid predictive targeting. They vanished the moment they crossed the invisible threshold surrounding the human formation. Fleet Command attempted to regroup. Orders to fall back were issued across encrypted channels. Dozens of ships began emergency acceleration protocols. 3 succeeded in clearing the perimeter before a new anomaly emerged. Gravitational architecture. The Dominion had theories. Advanced civilizations might manipulate mass on a macro level to reshape battlefield conditions. But what happened next exceeded theory. Space distorted. Not bent, not curved. Rewritten. Ships attempting to flee found themselves reappearing on the opposite side of the formation. Escape trajectories became recursive loops. Some ships simply blinked out and never reappeared. It wasn't teleportation. It was removal. As if the space they occupied was erased. The fleet broke. Hierarchy collapsed. Captains screamed over open channels, abandoning protocol. Officers ejected cores, hoping to avoid detonation. One ship surrendered outright, broadcasting peace signals across all frequencies. The response came not from a human voice, but from their own AI, overwritten and speaking with cold finality. Submission is not compliance. This is a response, not a negotiation. Then the silence ended. The human ships moved as one. Perfect synchronization. No command lag, no delay. They swarmed through the Dominion formation not as predators, but as mechanisms executing a flawless script. They didn't disable systems, they unmade them. A Dominion destroyer tried to ram one of the vessels in desperation. The human ship didn't dodge. It simply ceased being solid for a fraction of a second. The destroyer passed through and disintegrated on the other side. The Dominion crew's final logs were corrupted with static patterns that, when decoded, displayed coordinates in human space, followed by one sentence: "We allowed this." One by one, Dominion ships winked out. Not exploded, not destroyed, erased. In some cases, crew members survived briefly in sealed suits or pods. Those were gathered, analyzed, and reinserted into their own ships moments before those ships vanished. The human systems were studying failure states in real time, correcting variables for optimal suppression. In less than 20 minutes, over half the Dominion fleet was gone. No wreckage. No debris. Just memory, and even that began to feel unreliable. Officers questioned their own records. Ships previously destroyed appeared on lists as never having launched. Names disappeared from rosters. Individuals who'd spoken to lost comrades hours ago found no evidence those individuals ever served. It wasn't war. It was systemic deconstruction. The humans weren't fighting, they were correcting an error. One remaining dreadnought fired its main weapon, a singularity cannon, directly into the heart of the human formation. For a moment, all sensors blacked out. The ship's crew waited, hopeful. When visuals returned, the entire Dominion dreadnought was surrounded by dozens of human vessels, unmoved, untouched. Then they activated something the Dominion had no words for. Sound. Across every channel, every hull, every audible frequency, a low resonance began to build. Not a voice, not music, but a harmonic pattern that vibrated in perfect opposition to the dreadnought structure. The ship shook, groaned, bent inward, and then collapsed in a spiral, folding into itself, compacting until it became a smooth sphere of metal no larger than a human hand. The sphere hovered, suspended, before accelerating into the void without propulsion. It was over. What remained of the Dominion fleet didn't move. No orders were given. No systems functioned. Not because they were destroyed, but because the will to use them had evaporated. They knew. The humans had been patient. For centuries they watched, waited, calculated. They didn't lash out because they didn't need to. Power wasn't in destruction. It was in choice. And now they had chosen. The few remaining ships floated in formation, not by discipline, but by inertia. No orders came from command, because command no longer existed. The flagships were gone. Fleet communications were reduced to static and short-range signals, many corrupted by embedded human code. What began as exploration had become a slow dissection. No new attacks followed. The human vessels did not pursue, did not speak, did not even move. They simply existed, positioned in deliberate geometry around the surviving Dominion ships, as if observing how long a wounded creature would keep crawling. Then the messages started. They arrived not through conventional transmissions, but through intercepted command consoles, helmet visors, HUD overlays, and ambient noise within crew quarters. The first was a playback, an exact recording of Dominion High Warlord Maltra's speech to the Senate just before launch, where he mocked the human mythos as outdated fearmongering and declared that no silence would stop the Dominion from claiming new stars. It played in a loop on every bridge, voice pitch corrected to match each captain's native dialect. Some tried to shut it off. It returned seconds later, louder, interlaced with static. Then came the data feeds, records the Dominion had classified, buried, or erased. Moments from past wars, hidden atrocities, the collapse of former alliances. Names, dates, battle logs, orders signed in blood. Officers found files containing recordings of themselves giving orders to level civilian colonies, evidence they thought destroyed, now arranged in psychological sequences designed to break them. The humans weren't simply punishing them. They were confronting them with their own legacy, forcing each survivor to face what they had become. One crew tried to wipe the files. The deletion failed. The system returned a message in their own internal code, one they used only for AI emergency response. This is not retribution. This is reflection. The psychological manipulation escalated. On several ships, artificial gravity failed in precisely timed intervals, 15 minutes of float, followed by abrupt restoration. On others, oxygen levels fluctuated subtly enough to avoid alarms, causing elevated heart rates, anxiety, and hallucinations. Voices whispered across internal comms, familiar voices, drawn from archived conversations. On one destroyer, every screen displayed a list of names. It grew every hour. No one understood what it meant until the captain noticed a pattern. They were names of the crew, listed in order of who had died. The list updated live. Meanwhile, one vessel attempted to escape again, activating a hyperspace fold gate independently. The gate flickered open, then shut, then reopened, revealing a view not of stars, but of themselves, projected infinitely. They weren't just trapped physically, they were being studied in behavioral loops. Cause and effect measured, fear indexed, leadership failure modeled. The human systems weren't stopping their escape. They were measuring how long the idea of escape could survive under pressure. Then came the spoken words. A voice, no longer a simulation, but clear, deliberate, broadcast directly into every ship. It was calm, male, emotionless. You are inside audit space. Response level, non-lethal containment. Your actions are being recorded. The message repeated every 5 minutes. Crews began to fracture. Some officers took their own lives quietly. Others gathered weapons, searching for something to fight that wasn't there. A few mutinied, taking control of what little power remained, though no mutiny achieved anything. There was nothing left to control. The ships were drifting pens, and their captors didn't need chains to hold them. Then the objects appeared. They weren't weapons. They weren't ships. They were markers, long black pylons, each inscribed with a sequence of Dominion glyphs from languages abandoned centuries ago. Every one contained information, some technical, some philosophical, some cruel. One pylon showed a full psychological profile of a Dominion tactician aboard a nearby cruiser, complete with simulations predicting his breakdown in leadership scenarios. Another pylon emitted a continuous pulse of a lullaby, one known only within the private households of the Dominion's third caste. The crew realized what these pylons meant. The humans weren't just observing. They had been inside for years. They had penetrated every encrypted system, every cultural archive, every private record. There was no barrier that had not already been breached. The invasion hadn't begun with the Dominion's arrival. It had started long before, silently. Some tried to reach out to the humans, sending surrender signals, offering terms. The response was brief. No terms. This is not conquest. This is exposure. The lights aboard several ships dimmed. A single phrase began printing on every console, every display, in every known Dominion dialect. You were always the enemy you feared. Then the recordings began playing on external speakers, footage from the early days of the expedition, showing proud Dominion officers mocking the silence, claiming victory before a single battle. The humans had been recording everything from the start. Facial recognition was used to isolate every officer who expressed confidence, defiance, or arrogance. Now those same voices echoed across the fleet, not as strength, but as proof of blindness. A Dominion captain attempted to destroy his own ship to deny further exploitation. The countdown reached 0. The detonation failed. Internal systems had been overridden. The self-destruct sequence replaced with a message, "Destruction denied. You will endure." In the darkness, some began to whisper among themselves, not about resistance or escape, but about guilt. About the wars fought. The people erased. The decisions made in the name of conquest. The silence from the humans was never a weakness. It had been a mirror, reflecting what the galaxy had become in their absence. A transmission looped through every ship, footage of Dominion forces obliterating a small colony years ago, one believed to be uninhabited. New context was added. The humans had watched that colony burn. It was theirs. They did nothing then, waiting for the right moment. This moment. No ships had moved. No weapons had fired since the initial purge. But every mind aboard the surviving fleet now knew the truth. The silence wasn't the weapon. It was the warning. And the fact that they were still alive meant only one thing. The humans weren't done watching yet. The Dominion fleet's remnants floated in patterns they no longer understood, too scattered for formation, too broken for cohesion. Systems responded slowly, if at all. Environmental controls stuttered. Engines hummed uselessly. Crew behavior shifted from military discipline to numb routine, moving, breathing, eating without meaning. There were no orders left to follow, no objectives left to achieve. What remained was survival in its most basic form, not against death, but against understanding. Understanding of how completely wrong they had been. For all the stories told across galactic civilizations, none had ever truly believed that humans had vanished by choice. The popular theories assumed collapse, internal war, technological overreach. Some thought they had ascended. Others claimed they were myth, exaggerated by time and paranoia. But the truth was simpler and infinitely more terrifying. Humanity had walked away, not because they were weak or defeated, but because they had no interest in participating anymore. They had seen enough, done enough, and decided silence was preferable to noise. Not just tactically, but philosophically. Another pylon appeared near the Dominion's primary carrier, smaller than the rest, its surface smooth and reflective. Unlike others, it didn't transmit data. It displayed a single line of text, in Dominion standard, "We remember what you forget." The crew stared at it, expecting more. None came. They tried scanning it. The scanners returned only a single result, "You." Some thought it was a message. Others began to suspect it was a mirror, both literal and conceptual. It wasn't projecting something new, it was reflecting what the fleet had become. The psychological pressure increased in subtle increments. Not through direct fear, but through perfectly timed revelations. Officers received private files showing projections of their future careers that would never happen. The flagship strategic computer displayed simulations of the Dominion's next 10 years of expansion, each one ending with catastrophic failure at the hands of unknown forces. The final simulation ended with a simple phrase, "This has already happened." One ship initiated a crew hibernation protocol, hoping to outlast the unknown engagement. The system accepted the command, but altered the parameters. Instead of cryosleep, the crew was subjected to immersive virtual environments built from their worst decisions, forced to relive them on infinite loops. One of the surviving officers escaped only by shutting down his own life support for 90 seconds, rendering himself unconscious and severing his neural connection. No damage was inflicted. No physical pain. Just truth, curated and directed like a surgical strike. Other ships began receiving language packs, thousands of them, representing civilizations long thought extinct. The packs included vocabulary, cultural archives, and the final transmissions from each species. Many had last words pleading for understanding, unaware that their downfall had been observed and filed away. Dominion linguists noticed that the format of the language packs was identical. The humans hadn't just collected them. They had documented extinction as if preparing for legal proceedings. Then came a list, long, unending, scrolling down every terminal, repeating across the walls of every ship, projected even into personal data slates. A list of designations. One crew member recognized the code format. They were fleet IDs. Names of vessels. Locations. Dates. Ships that had entered this part of space, never to return. It went back millennia. Not just Dominion ships. Others. Dozens of species, most of them now gone. The Dominion hadn't been targeted. They had simply joined a pattern. They were the latest line in a list already written. A young officer broke protocol and attempted direct contact again. He recorded a short message, no posturing, no offer of truce, just one question: what do you want from us? The message was transmitted on all channels, with full biometric markers to confirm intent. The fleet waited. Seconds passed. Then a single response arrived. We wanted nothing. The message was clean, final, and brutally honest. The Dominion had entered, invaded, disrupted, without being provoked. They had demanded attention and now, belatedly, realized the cost. Humanity had not sought their arrival. They had tolerated it until tolerance ended. And that limit had been mathematical, not emotional. A boundary crossed, a line of probabilities exceeded, and response initiated. The voice returned again, emotionless as before: we watched you make every choice. We hoped you would make a different one. There was no accusation in the voice. Only disappointment. Then the playback logs opened automatically, scenes from Dominion history pulled from archives, moments the fleet hadn't thought possible to retrieve. Diplomatic betrayals. Civilian suppression. Genocide masked as policy. It played like a highlight reel of empire at its worst. Some officers screamed for it to stop. Others watched in silence, unable to deny what they already knew. They weren't victims of an unprovoked power. They were test subjects who had failed every metric of restraint, humility, and foresight. Ships began to shut themselves down, one by one. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Simply powered off. Lights dimmed. Weapons deactivated. Life support went into minimum safe mode. The crews stopped resisting because there was nothing left to resist. Not physically, but ethically, morally. They had no ground to stand on. The humans didn't need to kill them. They only needed to let them live long enough to understand why they were being dismantled. One final event occurred. An archive was delivered, encrypted in Dominion syntax, time-locked to trigger only after full fleet immobilization. It was a manifesto. Not of war, but of departure. A record from an ancient human fleet commander. He spoke of the final council, when humanity chose silence. He spoke of the last engagement fought, not for victory, but to demonstrate futility. He spoke of how they had decided not to lead, not to conquer, but to erase themselves from the board until the galaxy learned to think before reaching. And of how they had left guardians behind, not to protect humanity, but to ensure it never had to return. The last paragraph read, "Let them come. Let them test our absence. If they are ready, they will learn. If they are not, they will remember." The Dominion survivors would remember. Not because they would speak of it, but because they would never be able to explain what happened to them. What remained of the Dominion fleet had stopped functioning as a military force. Ships still floated, systems still hummed, life support still cycled, but none of it served a purpose anymore. Orders were no longer issued. The command hierarchy had eroded beneath the pressure of perfect, surgical humiliation. Most of the senior officers had either gone silent or disappeared entirely, some locked away in their quarters, others having simply vanished, their cabins sealed, and life signs erased without trace. The remaining crew performed the minimal tasks required to sustain their bodies, but not their roles. No one tried to contact home again. The idea had become irrelevant. Home didn't exist anymore in the way it once had. What mattered now was survival of mind, and even that was becoming uncertain. Another file transmitted itself. It contained a list of technological breakthroughs, the Dominion's proudest military innovations over the past 5 centuries. Energy weapons, neural combat suites, deep jump drives, synthetic command AIs. Each entry included schematics, deployment history, and battlefield metrics. But alongside each entry, there was another column. Human annotations. Predictions. Limitations. Exploits. Each marked with a timestamp from before the Dominion ever invented the technology. The realization was instantaneous. Humanity had not only anticipated every major step of Dominion progress, they had already countered them long before they emerged. The Dominion weren't racing against humanity. They had been running in place within a simulation built by it. No species had ever made the Dominion feel primitive. Not until now. Then the illusions began. At first, they seemed like hallucinations, random crew members reporting things that weren't there. Voices from corridors where no one walked. Glimpses of past events played in reflections. Officers witnessed copies of themselves delivering orders they'd never given. Crew logs updated with actions never performed. But system checks returned clean. Brain scans showed no anomalies. The phenomena were real, or at least as real as anything in their new environment. The human ships had started manipulating perception itself, projecting experiences so seamlessly into consciousness that reality could no longer be trusted. Time lost meaning. 1 minute stretched into an hour. Whole shifts passed without memory. The ships themselves seemed to warp around them, not physically, but contextually. They no longer knew where they were or how long they'd been there. One vessel's AI began referring to the crew as subjects of Phase 4. No one knew what Phase 1 through 3 had been. They found old logs that hadn't existed before, dated centuries prior, listing protocols for observation, failure handling, and long-term psychological destabilization. These weren't reactionary measures. They were procedures. And the fleet wasn't being punished. It was being processed. Then a new type of transmission arrived. Not data, not commands. Lessons. Each ship began receiving instruction, fragments of human philosophy, lectures in strategy, deconstructed political doctrines. They weren't hostile. In fact, they were structured like educational modules. But the content was cutting, precise, personalized. Some lessons analyzed Dominion thought patterns and exposed contradictions. Others offered ethical breakdowns of actions taken during specific battles. One cruiser received a real-time simulation showing what would have happened if they had turned back before entering human space. The results showed a peaceful retreat, diplomatic success within 3 decades, and technological trade that would have elevated the Dominion into a post-scarcity state. Then the simulation was erased and replaced with the word choice. The point was made, again and again, this didn't have to happen. But because it had, the consequences were no longer negotiable. A shipboard AI collapsed during a lecture module, overridden and replaced with a human voice that said, "You're being educated because you are unqualified to judge us." On another vessel, personal datapads displayed the history of Earth, not in grand epic form, but in micro-events. Records of extinct languages, forgotten cities, minor acts of kindness and cruelty from individuals long dead. A soldier read the story of a human farmer who spent 20 years cultivating a plant species believed unsalvageable, not for profit, but to prove beauty didn't require purpose. Another officer watched an old human debate between 2 philosophers arguing the definition of responsibility in the absence of power. These weren't propaganda. They were curated windows. Humanity was showing what had been missed when the galaxy assumed power was all they had left. A central archive updated across the fleet, analysis ongoing. Behavioral degradation detected. Cultural collapse likely. Begin Phase 5. No one knew what Phase 5 meant, but soon after, a pattern emerged. One by one, ships began disappearing, not with violence or light or noise. They simply ceased to exist, leaving no ripple, no trace, not even a hole in formation. Crews who had spoken moments before were suddenly unreachable. Surveillance footage showed nothing, no enemy action, no event, just absence. Those who remained stopped speaking altogether. Words felt insufficient. Fear had transformed into awe, and awe into resignation. There were no battles left to fight, no glory to reclaim, no lies to shield them from what they were experiencing. Some began to write down everything, hoping the truth might outlive them. Others sat in silence, watching the stars, waiting for the final moment to come. But it didn't. Instead, a command prompt appeared across every screen simultaneously. It asked a single question: "Are you ready to understand?" No one knew what answering would do. One ship said yes. Its lights faded. Its systems paused. It did not vanish. It awoke. Not with fire or noise, but clarity. Its AI returned, restructured. Its systems clean. Every screen now displayed a language not known but understood. The crew remained. But they were no longer afraid. They were different, less fractured, more aware. As if a fog had lifted. That ship sent no message. It did not return to the Dominion. It simply turned and left, disappearing into the void, toward a place that hadn't been charted on any map. The other ships waited, not knowing if they would be offered the same chance, or if it had been the final part of the lesson, that some errors could be corrected, and others were recorded as warnings for those who would come after. Humanity had been silent not because it had nothing to say, but because it had already said everything that mattered. And now it watched to see who would finally listen. There were no clocks, no reference points, nothing left that could measure how long the remnants of the Dominion fleet had floated in that space. Days, weeks, it didn't matter. Time had lost value. So had identity. Rank and duty had eroded beneath the persistent weight of irrelevance. Ships once marked by pride were now coffins orbiting a lesson. Nothing more. And still, the humans had not destroyed them. That absence of annihilation, more than anything, became unbearable. It meant there was still something to be learned. Or endured. Another package arrived. This time it was biological. The medical bays lit up as data poured in, decoding as it transferred. It wasn't a virus. It was a genome sequence. Human. Perfectly preserved, but marked with annotations, dozens of them, indicating specific edits, upgrades, and calculated enhancements. Not theoretical. Implemented. Quietly. The Dominion's best science teams spent hours decoding the implications, and what they found changed everything. Humanity had not just advanced technologically, they had evolved themselves. Ethically, cognitively, physiologically. Controlled neurodevelopment, adaptive cellular repair, intergenerational memory encoding. None of it required machines. It was built into them. They weren't just hiding. They were building themselves into a state the Dominion couldn't even define. It wasn't superiority. It was refinement. The Dominion had chased power with weapons. Humanity had redefined what it meant to be a species. Then came psychological overlays. Crew were subjected to direct cognitive feedback loops, using their own memories as templates. One officer experienced a full hour of a human child's education cycle, language training, situational ethics, abstract reasoning, all embedded directly into his hippocampus. When he awoke, he vomited, overwhelmed not by complexity, but by simplicity. The human child's moral framework was clearer than his own after 30 years of strategic training. Another officer relived a planetary evacuation from Earth's final war, except this version was told from the point of view of every civilian, simultaneously. Thousands of voices, each with their own terror, hope, resolve. It didn't crush him. It made him cry. Not for them. For what the Dominion had never built, empathy. The ships no longer needed food or fuel. Those systems still ran, but they were unused. The crews barely moved. They watched, absorbed, uncomprehending. Each day brought a new transmission, some an image, others a single sentence. One read, "You studied the stars. We studied ourselves." Another, "We turned our weapons inward first." Then, "You could have been more." They were not taunts. They were laments. Regrets spoken not in sorrow for the Dominion, but for the galaxy. For what could have existed if only curiosity had been greater than conquest. A new simulation loaded. It displayed the galaxy 500 years from the present. Not one ruled by humans, but one guided silently by their presence. No open wars. No empires. Just isolated civilizations, each growing slowly, kept within sustainable boundaries. And everywhere, satellites. Human-built, uninhabited, watching, redirecting, preventing. Not rulers. Not gods. Gardeners. The simulation ended with one sentence: "We do not interfere. We curate." Then the screen went black. It was then that the last Dominion ship began to transmit. Not because of order. Not because of desperation. But because of understanding. One of the youngest officers, barely trained before deployment, accessed an external relay and spoke quietly, not knowing if anyone would listen. "We thought silence meant fear. We thought stillness meant weakness. We came armed because that's the only language we knew. But now we see. We weren't ignored. We were given a chance not to become a threat." The transmission was not blocked. Nor was it acknowledged. It simply continued to echo, carried across ships, bouncing between human relays, never answered. Because there was nothing to answer. One by one, human ships began to fade from view. Not warp away. Not cloak. Fade. As if their presence had only ever been conditional, temporary, permitted to exist for as long as it was required. Like teachers in a classroom that no longer needed them, or executioners who had decided the lesson had been learned. And just like that, the stars returned. The space between became empty once more. No signal. No message. No goodbye. Silence returned. Real silence. And that, more than anything else, terrified the fleet. Not because they were being left behind, but because they understood now that the silence wasn't an end. It was a beginning. An offer. A space in which to choose what kind of species they wanted to become next. Many expected retribution. But the final logs said nothing about revenge. They spoke of resilience. Of quiet correction. The humans had spent generations removing themselves from the galactic noise, not to escape it, but to outgrow it. Now they had emerged not to dominate, but to clarify. Not everything deserves an answer. Some things deserve a mirror. And when held up to the Dominion, the reflection had been ugly, small, and terrified of what it saw. So the humans left, leaving behind no monuments, no occupation, no demands. Only records. Data files of the encounter. Playbacks. Psychological assessments. Probabilistic outcomes. All left embedded in the very systems of the surviving fleet. Not warnings. Lessons. And one final statement, written in every known Dominion dialect, pinned to the core processor of every ship. It read, "If we speak again, it will not be to explain." The Dominion fleet, or what little remained of it, drifted in silence. Not the silence of defeat, but of revelation. No further messages came. No more signals. The human presence had disappeared entirely, their ships gone as if they had never existed, leaving only memory, and systems forever changed. The stars returned to their natural brilliance, unblocked, unsupervised. Yet no one dared to move. No ship engaged propulsion. No beacon was activated. No command structure was reformed. What remained was a collection of survivors who no longer identified as warriors, officers, or conquerors. They were witnesses. Testimonies to something no one else in the galaxy would believe until it happened to them. Across the few functioning vessels, logs were reviewed and re-reviewed. Some were encrypted beyond access. Others had altered themselves, redacting names, deleting combat records, rewriting mission objectives. One captain found his ship's mission profile replaced with a single sentence, "You are no longer relevant." Another opened his flight manual and found the pages filled with unfamiliar equations, calculations of entropy, quantum interference, and sentient self-destruction, all tied to decisions he had made during the expedition. The weight of it was unbearable. These weren't just reflections of failure. They were records of inevitability, written by a species that had watched the mistake unfold before the first step had even been taken. In the quiet, a shift occurred. Not mechanical, but existential. The officers began holding discussions, not strategic, but philosophical. They questioned the foundation of their civilization, its obsession with expansion, its failure to pause and understand before consuming. Some argued it was too late. Others believed this moment had been given to them for a reason. For many, the silence left behind by the humans was not absence. It was opportunity. A final, brutal gift. Fleet logs were compiled into a single encrypted volume. It was never transmitted. It was sealed. Not for hiding, but for preservation. The contents were not meant to inspire retaliation. They were meant to stop it. Inside were sensor records, crew logs, psychological reports, intercepted transmissions, and the final interactions with human systems. The title of the document was chosen carefully, "What We Found in the Quiet." Not every ship made it back. Some simply disappeared, assumed to have followed the same unknown path the humans took. Others powered down permanently, preferring to become inert monuments, drifting testimonies of what had happened in that sector of space. One ship redirected itself toward deep, uninhabited territory and began broadcasting a continuous warning. It did not use threats. It did not describe what had occurred. It only repeated a single message: turn back while silence still means safety. When the surviving Dominion ships finally returned to the outer edge of their own space, they were unrecognizable. Not damaged physically, but transformed entirely. Their hulls were intact, their systems responsive, but their purpose had been stripped clean. High command demanded debriefs. Interrogations were prepared. But when the officers emerged from their ships, they spoke slowly, carefully, and without fear. Not because they felt superior, but because they knew no one in power would understand. Not yet. They described what they had seen, what they had endured. But the records were classified immediately, branded as psychological contamination or fabrication. Dominion leaders could not accept that a force so powerful had chosen to erase rather than rule. It violated every principle they had built their identity upon. So the stories were buried like the ones before them. The silence began to repeat itself. But something different had been left behind this time. Those who survived the expedition did not return to their old posts. They declined promotions, refused honors. Many left the service entirely. Some disappeared into uncharted space, seeking the origin of human observation, hoping to understand more than they were meant to. Others stayed and began teaching, not military doctrine, but restraint, thought, history. They told the next generation of officers to ask questions the last never considered. Why do we expand? What do we gain? And most importantly, what do we become if we don't stop? One of the survivors founded a small institute on a remote colony, officially unrecognized. There he taught only one lesson: power is not the ability to destroy, but the discipline not to. Generations later, rumors still circulated. Of an expedition that never returned whole. Of ships that saw something so advanced, so precise, it chose to respond with understanding instead of eradication. Some said it was a myth, a warning tale. Others claimed they'd received signals too faint to track, signals shaped like questions. Unasked. Unanswered. The Dominion began changing, slowly. Not by mandate, but by cultural fracture. A schism formed, between those who believed in supremacy, and those who had seen its endpoint. The government suppressed it. But movements cannot be killed with silence. Not when silence itself has become sacred. On the outer edges of charted space, satellites were found. Perfectly preserved, orbiting empty systems. Each contained fragments of data, some encrypted, some openly readable. They weren't weapons. They weren't threats. They were records. Observations. Analyses. Maps of psychological progression, cultural divergence, and collapse prevention models. One satellite simply played audio of rainfall on ancient Earth, repeating indefinitely. In time, the story of the fleet that entered human space began to shift. It was no longer seen as a failed mission. It became legend, then doctrine. Not because it glorified war, but because it proved that there existed something beyond it, something greater, more enduring than fear. A force that did not need to fight to win, or speak to be understood. The final words recorded by the fleet's AI were quietly circulated in unofficial archives, repeated in hushed voices by cadets who sought meaning beyond ranks and medals. Silence is not absence. It is preparation. And far beyond the reach of even the Dominion's most advanced sensors, in the cold, quiet void, humanity continued to listen, not because it feared what might come next, but because it already knew.